Now, at the time of the Civil War and throughout the late 19th and into the early 20th century, when you talked about racial and ethnic diversity in the Ozarks, you were talking about the relatively small black population. You were talking about some nationalities, some national diversity in terms of Germans and these other immigrant groups who are coming into the Ozarks after the Civil War and those who had come in before the Civil War. But certainly in the late 20th century and the early 21st century, the demographics of parts of the Ozarks start to change dramatically in a way that they had not been affected before, and with people who had not, for the most part, been in the Ozarks before. And here we're talking about the Hispanic in-migration to the Ozarks. This is an in-migration, a demographic change that hasn't had a lot of effect on Greene County and Springfield, but has had a tremendous effect on other parts of the Ozarks. This is one of those things where, for the most part, you can trace the impact of Hispanic in-migration to areas where the poultry industry has been major in the Ozarks. And there are several, it's not uniform around the Ozarks that you have the poultry processing industry, but where you have poultry processing, that has been really the major thing that has introduced large numbers of Latinos to the Ozarks over the last 2 decades to 20 years, maybe 20 plus years. And so you go back to the days when I was in college in the late 80s and early 90s, and there were practically no people of Hispanic heritage in the Ozarks. It was very rare to see any Latinos in the Ozarks, but nowadays it's much more common. In some places, they're just become so much a part of the fabric of communities that it's really changed the look and feel of some of these places. And it's kind of forced us to reevaluate, to rethink what it means to be the Ozarks, to be people of the Ozarks, because you've had a whole generation now of children born into these Hispanic families who've grown up in northwest Arkansas and southwest Missouri in the Ozarks. And are they Ozarkers? When we think of Ozarkers, it's probably not the first thing that comes to mind, but it sort of forces us to rethink our definition of what it means to be part of a region. Who are the Ozarkers? The same thing could be said for racial minorities as well. My guess is that most people, either in the Ozarks or outside of the Ozarks, when you say Ozarker, or you talk about Ozark Hill people or something like that, almost no one thinks of black people. It's an image that it's mainly a white image that's conjured up, and certainly one that's being challenged in the last generation by these newcomers. We'll get back to the Hispanic in-migration in a minute. You've got part of what's going on, especially in the last 20 or 25 years, is as you get this more kind of metropolitan feel to both Springfield and northwest Arkansas, what's sometimes referred to as Northwest Arkansas City, which is not one city, but it's just 4 cities that have kind of grown together in northwest Arkansas, all the way from Bentonville, which is where Walmart is headquartered, all the way down to Fayetteville, where the University of Arkansas is. And you've got a true metropolitan area there now with over 250,000 people living in that area. Lots and lots of people who've moved in from other places that have brought about not only increasing racial and ethnic diversity, but religious diversity and diversity of diverse number of people who've come from other parts of the United States, other parts of the world. There's a book that came out a couple years ago about Bentonville and the Walmart effect on northwest Arkansas, Boomtown, USA. This idea If you know much about Walmart, you know that this is the largest retail corporation in the world. And because Walmart is so large and powerful, several years ago, they started telling their vendors, the companies they do business with, that they buy items from, you guys need to come to us to sell your stuff. And so all of these companies from around the United States and around the world set up headquarters in Bentonville and surrounding towns. They have their own representatives on the ground there to deal with Walmart executives. And so you get this really multinational feel to a little place that even 25 years ago was still kind of a country town in northwest Arkansas. So it's really changed the place, and you get that Boomtown international effect there. And now Bentonville has that great art museum down there, Crystal Bridges Art Museum. And so the town itself is really making strides to sort of become more of a cosmopolitan, international sort of place. Even though you still got, on the outskirts of Bentonville, you still got, chicken houses and cattle farms and stuff like that. So it's a process. It's still, it still has those signs of the rural Ozarks around it, even though it's changed a lot. But that's going on. And to a certain degree, Springfield experiences some of the same stuff. Springfield doesn't have Walmart, obviously, but there are lots of large corporations here in Springfield. There's a lot of influx of people from around the country and some foreigners as well here in Springfield.
Do you think that Bentonville, Arkansas is going to continue to increase and get bigger and kind of drift away from the rural?
Bentonville? Yeah, the question is, do I think that Bentonville will continue to grow and sort of get away from its rural roots and stuff like that? I'd say yes. I think probably that would probably be a goal of most of the city leaders of Bentonville, would be to kind of distance itself from any sort of Ozarks connection that it has. I'm not sure that Sam Walton would have been comfortable with that, but I think the people who run Walmart now and who run the city of Bentonville with the Crystal Bridges and all that kind of stuff, I think they'll continue to make the town more cosmopolitan and sort of make people forget that they're in Arkansas if they can, that they're in the Ozarks.
It's a Norman Rockwell town.
The old downtown is.
Yes, and I think they'll keep that.
Well, that's, yeah, Millie, I don't, as far as the downtown area,
The square.
the Norman Rockwell quality, yeah, Walmart has its museum there, and I think if for no other reason, because Sam Walton partially got his start there on the square in Bentonville, and there's that kind of romantic, like you say, Norman Rockwell quality to that area. But outside of the downtown, where the actual business is transacted and all that kind of stuff, it will continue, I think, to become more and more cosmopolitan. And they can keep the downtown as a sort of quaint reminder of what we used to be, and attract tourists there. You go to downtown Bentonville, there are usually lots of tourists hanging around, going to the Walmart museum and all that. So, yeah, you can do both. You can head into the future, but still sort of play up colorful, romantic parts of your past, especially when it helps bring in a few tourism dollars and stuff like that. But you have to remember that as these towns grow, like Rogers and Bentonville and Springdale and Fayetteville, they're not growing out of natural increase because all of a sudden the natives are having a whole lot more kids. They're growing because new people are coming in, and the new people who are coming in generally don't have any connection to the history of the area. And for some of them, it probably would be better for them to just to kind of sweep all the old Ozarks stereotypes and Ozarks history under the rug somewhere. You know, if you're there for the business and you're there for the money, you know, that may be nothing more than a hindrance to you. You know, let's get big and get cosmopolitan fast. Though I'm sure a lot of people had mixed feelings about that. Probably a lot of them liked the fact that there's still a kind of small town feel to the place, and the fact that you can be in, you know, you can get on your bike and in 5 minutes, you know, be on a farm road somewhere that you can't do elsewhere.
How many people in Bella Vista?
Bella Vista, I don't know the exact population. I would say probably around 15 or 20,000 in Bella Vista. Bella Vista is a retirement community near Bentonville, right there on the state line on the Arkansas side. But yeah, Bella Vista it's its own little place too. Yeah, mostly retirees live in Bella Vista. Yeah. You've got other kind of unusual little enclaves there in northwest Arkansas. You've got a significant concentration of Marshall Islanders in the Springdale area. I think it's the largest group of Marshall Islanders anywhere outside of the Marshall Islands and Pacific Islands. And there's the last time I was in Springdale, I stopped and took a picture of a sign. There was like a Marshall Islander church out there. I don't even remember what kind of church it was, but you know, right there in Springdale, just another group that was, you know, brought in basically for cheap labor purposes, and like a lot of the Hispanics first started coming in for. And, you know, the group kind of grows. They write back or phone back and say, hey, you know, it's a good place to come. And the first thing you know, cousins and other people are coming. So you get Marshall Islanders. And you've got increasingly in the last 10 or so years, you've had small groups of Africans and Asians who've come into the Ozarks as well. Southwest Missouri, McDonald County, Somalians. You know, groups that you wouldn't expect in 100 years to find anywhere in the Ozarks, and a lot of them have been brought into the region again for labor purposes, whether it's chicken processing factories or other industrial, you know, establishments, and so, you know, the diversity is certainly increasing in the Ozarks in the last generation. Of course, the biggest story, as we mentioned, has been the Hispanic boom in the Ozarks. And the most recent numbers I have are from the 2010 census, the last census that we did. And the numbers are really, really staggering in terms of the demographic change that has taken place in northwest Arkansas and southwest Missouri, where you have big concentrations of the poultry processing industry, which we don't have here in Greene County, and we don't have the Hispanic in-migration here. Is that Tyson? There's George's. There's, you know, other poultry processing companies, but you know, that's Tyson is the biggest one, and it is located in Springdale, Arkansas. But you can see the three counties in the northwest corner of Arkansas, Benton, Carroll, and Washington, have experienced the most significant growth. In 2010, all three of them roughly reported a Hispanic population that was 15.5% of the overall population. And that is really, really significant when you consider that in 1990, the Hispanic population of those three counties was less than 1.5%. I mean, it was basically non-existent in 1990, and this has all happened in the 1990s and the early 2000s, that you have this huge influx of Latinos into northwest Arkansas and, as we'll get to in a minute, southwest Missouri.
Are they here working or are they citizens?
Probably a little of both. And if you mean are they here working? Visa. Oh, okay. Working legally, and there have been instances of legally and illegally in the country here. But it was the poultry processing industry that first started bringing them into the region in the 1990s. I remember back in, it's probably about 97 or 8, one of the larger newspapers in Arkansas ran a series, like a 3-part series, chronicling the influx of this Hispanic population in northwest Arkansas. At that time, it was really new. It had been happening just for a couple of years, and it would continue to boom. And nowadays, almost practically all of the low-skill, low-wage poultry industry jobs are held by Latinos. Whether they're from Mexico or Guatemala or wherever they come from to get to the Ozarks, almost all of those jobs, or they're held by other immigrants from Africa or somewhere like that who've been spearheaded and brought over just for that purpose. And it was, it mainly boils down to simple economics. It's cheap labor. And, these are jobs that 20, 25 years ago were held almost exclusively by natives of the Ozarks, by whites who had little to no education and little to no skill. And they were gutting and defeathering the birds and doing that kind of stuff. And it's a different sort of thing. Yeah. In this case, the jobs weren't outsourced by taking them somewhere else, like we've seen with a lot of the industry in the Ozarks and around the country in the last 20 years. The workers were brought in to work these jobs.
Kind of like Wall Street corporate, to get the shareholders more money, they bring in cheap labor.
And that's what industry's about. It's the bottom line. It's efficiency. Yeah, and that's what's happened with these industries. And
Well, as opposed to the migrant workers, these are year-round.
right. These are That's a good point, Millie. That we shouldn't confuse these with migrant workers. Who we generally associate with agricultural work, seasonal work, following crops and things like that. These are people who have moved into the region, and for the most part, they move in and stay. Whether they're legally, and the majority of them are legally here, though there have been plenty of cases of busts of illegal immigration and illegal immigrants working at these chicken plants, both in the Ozarks and other places, Minnesota and wherever these things have happened. But for the most part, they stay, and as I mentioned earlier, they've raised families, and the kids, some of whom have graduated high school by now, having grown up in the Ozarks. This is what they know. This is their home region. So, but in the Missouri Ozarks, McDonald County has the highest percentage of Hispanic population. McDonald County is the extreme southwest county in Missouri, and the strong poultry processing presence down there as well. And McDonald County also has lots of other racial and ethnic minority groups down there as well. We'll talk about in a minute. Washington County in Arkansas, of all of the counties in the Ozarks, Arkansas or Missouri has the highest percentage of non-white population in the region. And a lot of this has to do with the university and the typical diversity you get around a university community. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Tyson is located in Washington County, and you have a very large Hispanic population there. A larger, because of the university setting, you have a slightly larger black population than you do in some other places in the Ozarks.
Does Carthage, Missouri have like a poultry plant or anything around it? Because my boyfriend's from there. He always said there was a lot of like Latinos growing up there.
Carthage, Missouri, poultry plant. I don't know. It may have. Does anybody? I don't think we have anybody from that neck of the woods. I'm not sure. Now, Carthage, Missouri, I think has a small Vietnamese community over there.
He talks about that too.
But I'm not sure why. There may be a poultry processing plant there. I don't really know much about Carthage, which is right on the edge of the Ozarks over by Joplin. But there may be one over there. Yeah.
Missouri State has a lot of Oriental students, isn't that correct?
Right. There are. Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you count population of an area, are they considered, like, while they're here, are they part of the mix?
Right. Yeah. Millie asks about the Asian student population here at Missouri State, and when it comes to census figures and all that kind of stuff, I don't believe that they would be counted. There are, I think there are now close to 1,000 just Chinese students at Missouri State, and that's not counting any other Asian or Middle Eastern students or anything like that. And I don't think that they would be counted in a census. If you're American and you're going off to college in one of these census years, like when I was in college in 1990 when we did the census that year, I was not counted in the county where I was going to college. I was still counted in my parents' household as a college student, going away to school. And you even see that, you go back into the 1800s and you'll see in census records. Yeah, and that's how they do it. So as far as foreign students, I don't think they would be counted at all. And so you can imagine that in a place like Fayetteville and here in Springfield with all the universities and colleges we have, that the diversity would even be greater than is reflected in the census records. Yeah.
I just Wikipedia Carthage, and it actually says the Hispanic or Latino population is 25.6% of the population.
Wow, 25.6.
So now I need to find out why.
Yeah, it's I would that one
I know it is Wikipedia, but
that's Wikipedia equals accuracy. That's it's much better than it was than it used to be. Yeah, I would be interested. There almost has to be.
and the population of the city is just like 12,000.
Yeah. Yeah, there would almost have to be some sort of major industrial thing there that employed these people. Yeah, you don't find, as I said earlier, in most cases, the migrations are at least sparked by the poultry processing industry. That doesn't mean that's, you see a Latino somewhere and automatically assume that they work in a chicken plant somewhere, but that's the industry that started the process, started the ball rolling back in the 1990s.
It says it has several food manufacturers and processing plants around the city.
Yeah, that would make sense.
There's a great deal of slaughterhouse.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Or something like that.
Yeah, and that's Jasper County.
Yeah.
And I'm not, Jasper, when I went through the 2010 census, Jasper and Newton counties have pretty significant Hispanic populations, but they weren't as great as McDonald County at that time. And I didn't bring, I had a little sheet with some numbers on it, and apparently I didn't bring it with me tonight. But, so thanks for looking that up. And, it's just another example in southwest Missouri. But again, for most of the Ozarks region, when you get away from extreme southwest Missouri, extreme northwest Arkansas, and a couple of other locations in the Ozarks, in the southeastern Ozarks, in Batesville, Arkansas, where I used to teach, they've got a couple of chicken processing plants there and a pretty sizable Hispanic population. Outside of these little areas, which aren't so little as we can see, the Hispanic in-migration has had really very little effect. You know, you can go to counties and towns and areas in the interior of the Ozarks and still not find any real evidence of Hispanic in-migration in these places. Ozark County and again, Douglas County, some of these places where, and as I mentioned, even Greene County, we don't really have any sort of industrial setting that attracts Hispanics here either. But certainly that's been one of the major stories of these areas, southwest Missouri, northwest Arkansas. And you can see, I mentioned Carroll County earlier. Carroll County is, the Hispanic immigration there took place even a little bit later than it did in Washington and Benton counties in Arkansas, because the poultry processing places are a little newer there. And Carroll County, which is where Eureka Springs is located, Berryville and those places, you can see in 1990, the Hispanic population was 1%, and then, as I mentioned earlier, in Benton and Washington counties, it was roughly 1.5% in 1990. So it's just really, really completely changed the whole complexion of these places. So that now you get, you go to northwest Arkansas and southwest Missouri, you turn on the radio and start switching dials, and you'll hear a lot of Spanish language radio station. You can find Spanish language publications, businesses. In some cases where there's been really large in-migrations, you can find almost business districts that are devoted to Hispanic food and different merchandise, that kind of stuff.
Is this a good thing, or are they being taken advantage of?
Are the Latinos being taken advantage of? Well, it's one of those things. There's no good answer to that. I mean, it's not necessarily bad or good. They're taking advantage of opportunity that is presented to them, and compared to what they have, then they're making a lot of money compared to what they had access to before. And I'm sure many of them think it's a good opportunity. It's the beginnings of realizing the American dream, and in that way, their story is not terribly different than the old American story.
Same thing with Irish.
Yeah, it's with the people who came here before. You can't use the Ozarks as a great example because the vast majority of people who came to the Ozarks up until the 20th century were farmers, and you're looking at different things. But I think of it this way: if you think of you go back to the 1940s and 50s in the Ozarks, and compare it to, say, Central America or Mexico or somewhere like that. In the 1940s and 50s, there was a huge outmigration of farm people and small town and rural people from the Ozarks, especially from the poor counties of South Central Missouri, Southeastern Missouri, North Arkansas. Some of these counties were losing 40-50% of their population between World War II and the mid-1960s. There were no jobs. There was no way to make what was increasingly considered a decent living by American standards. People had to get up and leave. A few people stayed and survived, and that. But the people from here were going to Wichita and Kansas City and St. Louis, to the West Coast, to Bakersfield and L.A. and Washington State, all these different places. And they were often, we would look back now and say they were often taken advantage of. They were paid less than the natives of wherever it was they were going to. People in California resented the Okies. We know that from popular culture and watching the Grapes of Wrath and stuff like that. And so, the Ozarkers of an earlier generation, they were the cheap labor. They were going out and working for less than other people would work. And a generation later, it's Latinos who are coming into the Ozarks and working for less than the natives will work. And it's a lot of it is just this process of globalization. It's a process of shrinking the world and everything kind of coming together, and all of a sudden we find ourselves connected with Mexico and Central America and South America and the Pacific Islands and Africa and Asia in ways that we weren't even 20 years ago. And those connections are only going to continue to grow and to build. It's become increasingly impossible to be a little self-contained region in the United States or anywhere in the world, and certainly the Ozarks doesn't qualify as that anymore. Well, it's the old thing where it all depends on your perspective. Right. If you're the person who has come from abject poverty somewhere,
this is step up.
This is step up. And if you're if you're an academic from suburban America somewhere and you infiltrate a poultry plant, it's the worst thing you've ever seen in your life. How can these people be treated that way? And there's no there's no easy answer to that. Certainly they, from a certain perspective, they are being taken advantage of. They're being paid probably less than they're worth and that. But most of us, and by I say most of us, or our ancestors have been there at some point. We've been, whether your ancestors are Irish and were building the railroads, or Chinese labor on the West Coast, or whatever they were, at some point we've been at that level of the process, trying to work ourselves up, and probably glad for whatever work we could get. My family worked as migrant laborers. They were off and on, in the 40s and 50s. Picked apples and worked in the migrant fields, and we're glad to get the work because in the rural Ozarks there was almost nothing to do to make a living, a steady living, and a lot of people would have said, you're exploited and all that kind of stuff, and sometimes you get unexpected answers when you ask the supposedly exploited people, because they don't really have much of a choice, and their frame of reference just says it's better than we had, that kind of thing. So, yeah, not what Millie wanted to hear, but it's a complex issue, and the good thing from that standpoint is that there are lots of immigrant-owned businesses. You find they're usually small businesses, whether it's a tire shop or I know in the town where I used to teach in Batesville, there was one of the local service stations and like a U-Haul dealership and stuff was owned by a Mexican family who had been one of the first to immigrate into that area. And they were very successful. It was a small business, but a success story. And you have, Mexican restaurants and groceries and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of these, if not most of them, are owned by some of the newcomers themselves. So, it's all part of the It's all part of that kind of gradual process. The interesting thing to me is what long-term demographic effects these have. When I think for a lot of people, a lot of natives of the Ozarks, when this in-migration first started happening back in the 90s, I think a lot of people thought, well, this is a temporary sort of thing. And as Millie brought up earlier, the idea that a lot of people have of Hispanic workers is this idea of migrant workers drifting around the country. And these aren't migrant workers, and it hasn't been a temporary thing, or at least it hasn't yet. And it'll be interesting to see, 20, 30 years down the road, if you still have these large Hispanic communities, how much they integrate into, the broader society in the Ozarks, how much assimilation takes place, how much they influence the mostly white population around them, intermarriage, all these kinds of things that come with these demographic changes.
Do we welcome them?
Do we welcome them? I'm sure some of us don't, and some of us do. It's just like, it's like about anything else. Common sense tells us that not everybody is going to, with open arms, welcome these newcomers, especially when they're darker skinned than the vast majority of Ozarkers traditionally have been. They speak a different language, at least the first generation. Many of them are Catholic in an overwhelmingly Protestant region. There are socioeconomic issues. They tend to be poor when they first get here. But at the same time, I've heard lots of people who grew up poor in the rural Ozarks and who have been, as I mentioned earlier, have been in situations where they were the outcasts, where they went to the apple orchards in Michigan, or in the bean fields in different places, and they know what it's like to be looked down on, and they have a unique understanding and appreciation for these new workers who come in and aren't always welcomed by everybody. Yeah.
Isn't there more of a conservative mindset in the Ozarks than you would find, say, in St. Louis or Kansas City?
Overall, I think you're right that if you're wondering if there's a more conservative mindset in general in the Ozarks, yeah, I think so. And you look at Southwest Missouri, Northwest Arkansas. These are very solidly Republican areas in terms of who they send to Congress and how they vote in presidential and gubernatorial elections and all that kind of stuff. And that plays into it. We know that in party politics, often the Democrats have been more receptive to foreign immigration than have the Republicans. But again, it's a complex issue, and I'm sure a whole bunch of those Tyson executives are staunch Republicans, staunch conservatives.
So your thought process on this deal is how much money you got in the bank.
A lot of it boils down to money, and if it makes you money, you're all of a sudden much more comfortable with it. And a lot of times the people who aren't comfortable with it are the marginal natives, the people who had those jobs 20 years ago, and suddenly find themselves without those jobs. The people who are more on par with the newcomers, they're probably the ones more likely to resent Tyson and the chicken companies for bringing about this world that they suddenly find themselves in. So to me, it's as an academic, it's an intriguing thing. As someone who has the luxury of sitting back and watching it unfold and kind of, just seeing what happens, and not having really a financial stake in any of this, it's very, very interesting. Yeah. And even in southwest Missouri, again, even in places where you don't have the poultry processing industry, in the last few years, and these numbers come from, I think the News Leader, Springfield News Leader ran an article a couple years ago on, after the census statistics came out from 2010, looking at the Hispanic boom in southwest Missouri. Now this can be misleading because the population was so small in 2000 that we're still talking about, in most cases, a few hundred people. We're talking about a very small percentage of the overall population of Taney County and Christian County and these places. But it reflects the fact that even in places removed from the poultry processing centers, you're still having and seeing this increase in the Hispanic population.
And that is because, what's the why?
I really don't know what the why is beyond just the fact that there's a critical mass of Latinos now in the Ozarks, in these located in these certain areas, and it may just stand to reason that they're going to end up, migrating to other nearby towns from place to place. That parts of these communities are going to go out just as any other community would, and send out people, and they're going to move around the region. I'm not sure that there's any one explanation for the growth of for the 159% growth of the Hispanic population in Taney County. Branson's not a place that we generally associate with Hispanic culture in any way. Branson's kind of white bread America, but so I really don't know that there's a clear explanation. But again, that the Hispanic boom is a relative Hispanic boom in these areas, and went from a minuscule population to a tiny population, that kind of boom. It's not like the one we saw in northwest Arkansas. Now, the Asian boom, again, we're talking about small numbers here, and we're talking about a 2000 census that had practically no people of Asian descent in the Ozarks. But you have had some small settlements of Asian communities in southwest Missouri in recent years. McDonald County especially, you can see from 2000 to 2010, the Asian population increased by over 500%. And some of those are the Hmong people who've settled down there. A lot of these, again, were originally attracted into the region because of the poultry industry. Some of them as workers, some of them as farmers. There are some farm owners, Asian farm owners, down in that area. Berry County, which is next door to McDonald County, on the east side of McDonald County, you can see has had a significant influx. And Newton County, which is just north of McDonald County. So this is all, again, scrunched into southwest Missouri. And so these are, Vietnamese, Hmong, and they're not the same kind of Asian influx that we have here on campus or in Springfield because of our connections with Chinese universities or anything like that. Yeah. There was a story, I'll try to find it. It may not be up online anymore. I think the Kansas City Star did the story last year. Maybe it was the last summer or the summer before last. They did a story on McDonald County, Missouri, and talked about this weird. Here you are in the rural Ozarks, a place that 20 years ago was more likely to remind somebody of deliverance than it was of any sort of international. Because they did It was an area that's popular for floating and tourists and all that kind of stuff. And now in the 21st century, you've got people of Hispanic descent, you've got Asians, you've got Africans, you've got the locals who are still around, and it's just this hodgepodge in rural southwest Missouri. And at least according to the article, it depends on who you are. Some people would go there and see this as a tinderbox, as something just waiting to flame up and waiting, all these tensions, cultural, social tensions, waiting for something bad to happen. Or it may just be an example of how people tend to get along, even in a place like conservative southwest Missouri. There's... And of course, as we mentioned earlier, the diversity on university campuses has exploded in the 21st century here in the Ozarks, and certainly at Missouri State, especially with the increase in the Chinese student population. And it seems like you see a lot more foreign students on campus nowadays. And certainly at a place like the University of Arkansas and at other colleges around the region, colleges and universities are generally in the forefront of kind of diversifying the population and the atmosphere to begin with. And the idea that having the Asian students here has been financially good for the. I don't know either. I don't know how the financial side of that works, but I'm sure that's part of what they're doing here, and the university has for several years tried to increase diversity, and we've got programs for that, both in terms of racial diversity among the American students and the faculty and all that kind of stuff, but international diversity as well, and we can see the evidence of that over the last decade, really. I mean, you go back to 2000 and there were 21 Chinese students. I mean, you never would have seen them around campus in 2000. And by 2010, 691. I'm not sure what it is now, but it's probably more than that by now. Yeah. So we're probably talking about closer to 5% of the overall student population nowadays. Yeah. And I think that is the last slide. Yeah. Just a little bit kind of skipping around here and there, talking about diversity in the Ozarks. Again, mainly ethnic and racial diversity, but they're all, we could use that term talking about all kinds of stuff with the Ozarks, and we have.